is this nothing short of an appalling civil service coup?
Well, it seems to me that you can't go on strike as a civil servant if you don't like government policy. You have to resign, and that any civil servant who claims to strike on the basis of opposition to government policy, who doesn't resign, should be fired. That this is not like going on strike over pay or conditions or anything like this. It's a fundamental opposition to the whole basis of our Constitution that has an apolitical civil service that carries out the lawful instructions of the elected government. Any Home Office civil servant who fails to do that should be fired.
And presumably have their generous pension stripped off them as well, Jacob?
Well, it should be a disciplinary matter. Absolutely. They should lose benefits that they get from their employment for doing it. This is really very important, that the whole basis of our apolitical civil service is that it carries out the instructions of the elected government. If it fails to do that, then our Constitution doesn't operate properly. So it's a fundamental threat to our democratic system. It's very serious. And a civil servant who does this or proposes this should not be part of the civil service. And if they don't like the policy, they should resign and stand for elective office opposing it, not try and obstruct it in an unconstitutional manner.
Are the Conservative Party and the people who have voted consistently for controlled immigration and a reduction of illegal immigration, and the latest polling data, which as far as I can gather shows that around 48% of people support the Rwanda plan, are all of these people now at war with our civil service?
Well, we'll have to see whether they actually vote for a strike. There are some hard left members of the Civil Service Union who are like the train drivers union, that they want to bring down the elected government. That is their aim. I hope that that is not true across the civil service at large, and that civil servants will disassociate themselves with this hard left union.
Doesn't Keir Starmer, if indeed this takes place, have to actually come out against this kind of strike action? Because, good grief, I mean, this is the fabric of our democracy, isn't it? Civil servants are there to facilitate the work of government and a democratically elected government. And Keir Starmer could find himself on the wrong side of this if he doesn't oppose this behaviour.
Well, I doubt he would, because there's a lot of left-wingery in the civil service and not a great deal of right-wingery. And bear in mind, Sir Keir tried to engage Sue Gray whilst she was an active serving civil servant investigating Boris Johnson. And we have to think that his approach to the civil service is pretty irresponsible.
Is the civil service actively corrupt?
I'd blame the union. I mean, as a minister, I worked with many excellent civil servants who, regardless of their political opinions, were very happy to carry out government policy. That is our tradition going back to the Northcote Trevelyan reforms, and that's the basis of our constitutional settlement between the government and the civil service. If they won't carry out the norms of the Constitution, then we will have to move in a more Australian or American direction with a more politicised civil service. That will become the only option.
OK, just talk me through that then, our viewers and our listeners through that, because if people are sitting here now, on the day that the news broke that 80 Albanian individuals, criminals, some of whom are murderers, drug dealers, firearms traffickers, rapists, some of whom also crossed the channel, which of course the Rwanda scheme is designed to try to stop people from crossing the channel like this, have been sentenced to a grand total of 130 years in the first 4 months of this year alone. OK, so people were waking up to this news today, and they're also now being confronted with a situation where the civil service appears to not want to stop any of that stuff. What would the alternatives be? What could the Conservative government do to get their ideas and, crucially, their planes off the ground?
Well, in America, when a new government comes in, great swathes of the civil service are reappointed on a political basis. So Republicans appoint Republicans to carry out their policy. They don't have a tradition of an apolitical civil service. Our system has served us well in recent decades, but if the civil service won't go along with it, we will have to look at a more politicised civil service. That will simply become inevitable. And I think many people across the country, many of our viewers, will be absolutely appalled that the civil service no longer want to do their job. They don't want to go into work, they don't want to do the job when they are in work, and they've got a trade union that seems to want to get the pay for doing nothing in return.
Well, I did float earlier, Jacob, about the idea that if they're all working from home, a lot of them will have a spare room, and I dare say that if they were asked to accommodate a Channel migrant, their views on the Rwanda policy would change rather quickly. But just in terms of another big story for us today, Jacob, if that's OK, Kathleen Stock talking at Oxford Union, and this has caused a huge amount of controversy based around the idea that she thinks that women are women and men are men, which these days you can't go around saying stuff like that without the, as I call them, trans mafia getting involved. Why do you think this is causing so much controversy? Do you support Kathleen Stock? And what would you say to those people who were there shouting and swearing at her?
Well, I used to be an officer of the Oxford Union when I was a student, and I'm a trustee of its parent charity, so I fully support the invitation to her and her right to go, and I actually agree with her views, which I don't think are particularly controversial. I think there's only a small number of people who get very exercised about this who will be protesting. It's quite right that she should go and express her reasonable views.
OK, and just finally, Jacob, on this, how much do you think that could undermine just the very fabric of society if indeed we've spoken about some kind of infiltration in the civil service? What about infiltration in our education system? Is the reality, the sad reality, that before our very noses, our key institutions and the key ways in which this country functions have been infiltrated by people with a radical, woke, left-wing ideology, and we are now seeing the fruition of that?
Actually, I think we can be a bit more cheerful. That Oxford University has behaved very well over this, has supported free speech, has a large number of people at the university have spoken out in favour of Miss Stock actually going to give her talk. There are a few random ne'er-do-wells at the Oxford University Student Union, which is a very second-rate body that nobody takes much notice of, that have been complaining. But other than that, it's been actually a victory for freedom of speech. So have some confidence in at least some of our institutions. They're not all rotten.
I will do. And sorry, Jacob, I just reminded you of this. Any update as to what on earth is going on with Boris Johnson and the WhatsApp messages and them not being sent through and all of this? Do you know what's happening there?
I don't. I'm not sure anybody else does either. It seems to be a faintly chaotic situation between the Cabinet Office and this endless inquiry.